3:07 a.m. A man in a white coat walked into a locked ICU carrying a syringe with no barcode, no pharmacy label, and no business being anywhere near a critically ill patient. He moved like someone who had done this before, quiet, deliberate, completely unbothered by the sleeping hospital around him. One nurse saw him. One nurse recognized what he was. And in the next 4 minutes, she made a choice. Would turn a quiet Pittsburgh's hospital into the most dangerous place on the eastern seaboard. Her name was Maya Bennett, and everyone in that building had already decided she didn't matter. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is where the stories that keep you up at night live. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Because what happened inside Hartwell Regional Medical Center on the coldest Tuesday in February is something none of those doctors, none of those administrators, and none of those security officers will ever stop thinking about. The overnight shift at Hartwell Regional Medical Center in Pittsburgh smelled like floor wax and recycled air, and Maya Bennett had long since stopped noticing either one. She moved through the ICU the way she moved through everything quietly, efficiently, without asking for attention. She was never going to get anyway. It was 2:49 a.m. She had 3 hours left on her shift and 4 patients to monitor before the day team came in and immediately took credit for the stability she had spent all night maintaining. She was used to that. The ICU on the 6th floor held 8 beds behind glass-paneled rooms arranged in a wide semicircle around the central nursing station. 7 of those beds were occupied tonight. 2 post-surgical cases. 1 sepsis patient the residents kept arguing over. 2 cardiac monitors cycling through readings nobody was particularly worried about. 1 elderly woman recovering from a stroke who kept trying to pull out her nasogastric tube every time Maya turned her back. And embedded 7 behind the reinforced door that was separate from the rest of the unit, the one with the security badge reader that had been installed 18 days ago, without any explanation from administration, there was Garrett Weston. Maya didn't know much about Garrett Weston. The paperwork said he was 34, male, status post-traumatic injury, sustained in circumstances the chart described only as operational deployment, classified. He had been transferred to Hartwell under a Department of Defense medical transport order, with 2 men in civilian clothes sitting outside his door in rotating 8-hour shifts. The day shift nurses called them the shadows. The night supervisor had told everyone not to ask questions. Maya had read his chart carefully anyway, because that was what she did. Garrett Weston was a Navy SEAL. That wasn't in the chart. The chart listed him as a government contractor, but the tattoo on his left forearm told a different story, and his physical conditioning told another. His injuries were extensive: bilateral rib fractures, a grade 3 liver laceration that had been surgically repaired overseas, a traumatic brain injury mild enough that the neurology consult had been cautiously optimistic, but severe enough that he remained unconscious, sedated, and dependent on ventilator support. He was stable. Not good, but stable. And he had been stable for 11 straight days. Maya had been his night shift nurse for 8 of those 11 days. She walked her rounds at 2:52, going bed by bed the way she always did, not the cursory glance. The monitor walk that some of the newer nurses did, but a real assessment. She checked the sepsis patient's urine output and wrote down a number that concerned her. She repositioned the stroke patient gently and tucked her arm back under the rail before she could reach her NG tube again. She checked the 2 cardiac patients and updated both flow sheets. She was on her way to Garrett Weston's room when she passed the nursing station and noticed that the security log had a new entry. She stopped. The entry was time-stamped 2:48 a.m., 4 minutes ago. A physician had badged into the unit. The name listed was Dr. Victor Hale, Department of Defense, Medical Liaison. Maya had never heard that name in 8 nights. She picked up the unit phone and called the security desk downstairs. It rang 6 times before someone picked up, and when they did, it was the same guard who'd been half asleep behind his monitor every night this week. "This is Bennett, ICU 6. I need you to verify a physician badge access from about 4 minutes ago. Name's Hale Victor DOD Medical Liaison." A pause. Keyboard clicking? Yeah, he badged in. Credentialed through the administrative system this afternoon. Who credentialed him? Says here Dr. Alderman's office. Dr. Raymond Alderman was the chief medical officer. His office didn't credential anyone at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. His office barely returned calls before noon. Can you pull his photo from the badge record and send it to the unit printer? Another pause, longer this time. Is there a problem? Nurse Bennett. And I don't know yet. Can you send the photo? He did, reluctantly, the way people always did things for Maya, slowly, with a particular energy that communicated they considered it a favor rather than their job. The printer behind the nursing station hummed to life. Maya walked to Garrett Weston's room. The man inside was standing at the head of the bed. He had his back to the glass panel. He was wearing a white coat over dark clothing, and he was holding a syringe. He hadn't connected it to anything yet. Maya badged through the door. The man turned. He was somewhere in his late 40s with a square jaw and eyes that did something specific when he saw her, a rapid calculation, the kind that happened behind the face rather than on it. He recovered quickly, too quickly. "Nurse," he said. His voice was calm and professional, and completely wrong in a way that Maya registered somewhere below conscious thought. "I need you to step out. This patient requires an adjustment to his sedation protocol." "I'm his assigned nurse," Maya said. "I'll need to see the order. It's a classified medication adjustment coordinated through the DOD liaison office. I'm not required to run it through the standard pharmacy system." Maya looked at the syringe in his hand. No barcode. No pharmacy label. The plunger was partially depressed. He'd expelled air, which meant he intended to inject the full volume. The fluid inside was clear, completely clear, with a slight viscosity that didn't match any of the standard sedation agents she'd ever drawn up. "What's the medication?" she said. "That's classified. The medication name is classified. The protocol is classified." "Nurse, I don't have time for this. Step out." "I'm not stepping out," Maya said. "Show me the order." Something shifted in his expression. The professional calm developed a crack, just a hairline fracture, the kind most people would miss. Maya didn't miss it because she had spent 3 years in forward operating bases where reading the room wasn't a social skill, it was a survival mechanism. She took 1 step to the left, putting herself between the man and the central line port on Garrett Weston's IV tubing. "You need to stop," she said. "Move," he said. No. He moved toward the IV line. Maya's hand got there first. She clamped the tubing with 2 fingers and simultaneously reached across to hit the infusion pump's manual lock, a 3-button sequence that required knowing the pump model, which she did because she had worked with this exact equipment for 4 years. The pump screen flashed red and froze. The man stared at her hand on the tubing. That's a biohazard interference with a federal medical procedure," he said. His voice had dropped half a register. The professional warmth was completely gone now. "Then call federal authorities," Maya said. "I'll wait." For exactly 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then he lunged. He went for the IV port rather than for Maya, because he was smart enough to know that the injection was the objective and she was the obstacle, and the fastest way past an obstacle is around it. Maya yanked the entire IV line free from the port before his syringe could connect, a sharp pull that sent the needle skidding across the bed rail and clattering to the floor. She planted her foot against the base of the IV pole and shoved it sideways, and the entire stand swung into his path and clipped him across the forearm. He knocked it out of the way. Maya hit the emergency call button on the wall with her palm. The alarm was a two-tone pulse that sounded simultaneously at the nursing station, the security desk, and the charge nurse's pager. It was not subtle. In the 3 years she'd worked this unit, Maya had hit it exactly twice, once for a code blue, once for a patient who'd pulled out his arterial line and was bleeding on the ceiling. Security to ICU 6. The intercom announced overhead. Security to ICU 6. The man looked at her for one long moment. Then he looked at Garrett Weston, unconscious and breathing through a ventilator with a heart rate that hadn't changed through any of this. Then he looked at Maya again. "You have no idea what you just did," he said. "I stopped you," Maya said. "That's what I did." He moved toward the door. Maya stepped aside, not out of deference, but because she was not going to physically restrain him without backup, and the security team was already coming. He moved fast, with a controlled efficiency that confirmed everything she'd already concluded. He went through the ICU door and turned right, away from the elevators, toward the maintenance corridor. Maya was already on the phone to the nursing station. "Lock the unit. The man who just left bed 7 is not a doctor. Do not let him badge out through the maintenance exits. Call hospital security and tell them we have an unauthorized individual who may be armed." "Maya, what?" "Lock the unit. Right now." She hung up and looked through the glass at Garrett Weston. His ventilator cycled. His chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity. His vitals were unchanged. He was alive. The photo the security guard had printed was sitting on the nursing station counter when Maya walked out of the room. She picked it up. The face in the image was a different man, 20 years younger, 30 pounds lighter, with a different jaw and different eyes. The badge credentials for Dr. Victor Hale had been created using a stolen identity. Whoever had just been in Garrett Weston's room had walked in under a dead man's name. The security team arrived 90 seconds later, 2 officers from the overnight rotation, both of them slightly winded from the stairs. The senior one was a heavy-set man named Prater, who had the specific expression of someone who was already deciding that whatever a night shift nurse had to say was going to turn out to be an overreaction. "What's the situation?" he said. "A man accessed the ICU using fraudulent physician credentials," Maya said. "He entered the room of a DOD-protected patient, carrying an unlabeled syringe. When I intervened, he attempted to complete the injection by force. He fled through the unit approximately 3 minutes ago, heading toward the maintenance corridor on the east side of the building." Prater looked at her. Then he looked at the other officer. Then he looked back at Maya. "You're saying a doctor tried to inject a patient?" "I'm saying a man in a stolen white coat used a forged badge to access a protected patient's room with an unlabeled syringe. He was not a doctor." "How do you know he wasn't a doctor?" Maya was quiet for exactly 1 second. It was the same second she had learned to take years ago when someone asked her a question that deserved a careful answer rather than the first one that came to mind. "Because doctors look at their patients," she said. He never once looked at the patient. Prater's expression said he was not convinced. His expression also said that he was going to make a radio call and let someone else decide, which was fine with Maya, as long as that radio call went to someone who would actually seal the building. "You need to lock down the maintenance exits on floors 5 through 7, she said. "Right now, while he's still in that corridor. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." "Officer Prater." Maya kept her voice level. She had learned that, too, the specific register that communicated seriousness without tipping into the emotional range that men like Prater used as an excuse to stop listening. A man just attempted to murder a patient under DOD protection. If he gets out of this building through those maintenance exits, whatever happens next is going to be documented as a security failure that occurred after a nurse told you to lock the exits. I want to be very clear about that. Prater's jaw tightened. He picked up his radio. The lockdown order went out at 3:09 a.m. It was 2 minutes too late. Maya knew it was too late because when the maintenance corridor was swept for Minutes later, they found the east stairwell door propped open with a fire extinguisher and the external exit alarm disabled cleanly, professionally, the kind of work that took about 90 seconds to accomplish and required knowing exactly where the alarm's connection panel was mounted, which meant he had known the building, which meant he had been planning this for longer than one afternoon. She stood at the nursing station and processed that while Prater talked into his radio and the other officer walked her purposeful circles that didn't accomplish anything. The DOD protective detail, the two men who were supposed to be guarding Garrett Weston's door, had been pulled to a false medical emergency on the floor below at 2:44 a.m. Someone had called in a chest pain complaint on a patient who didn't exist. The detail had responded because that was protocol, and while they were gone, a man with a forged badge and an unlabeled syringe had walked into the ICU. It was a good plan, clean, coordinated, low signature. It had failed because of a night shift nurse who read charts too carefully and had spent 3 years learning to notice when something was wrong. Maya went back to her rounds. She checked Garrett Weston, first reconnected his IV line, verified his ventilator settings, confirmed his vitals were stable. She noted the disrupted central line port in her documentation with clinical precision and flagged it for the attending physician's morning review. She wrote her incident report while Prater and his colleague argued quietly about who was going to call the night supervisor. She was halfway through documenting the syringe, which she had retrieved from the floor and sealed in an evidence bag from the crash cart supply. Because no one else had thought to do it when the lights went out. Not just in Garrett Weston's room, not just in the ICU. The entire 6th floor went dark. The emergency generators were supposed to kick in within 8 seconds. Maya counted to 8, then to 10, then to 15. The ventilators switched to battery backup. The monitors screamed their low-power alerts in the darkness. The ICU filled with the sound of alarms. The generators did not come on. Maya grabbed the flashlight from her scrub pocket. She carried one on overnight shifts, had for 4 years, because the hospital's emergency lighting had failed twice in the last 18 months, and she had decided after the first time that she was not going to be the nurse standing in the dark, wondering where the flashlight was. She swept the beam across the nursing station. Both security officers were already on their radios. Somewhere down the hall, a patient was calling out. The stroke patient in bed 3 had been frightened by the alarms and was trying to sit up. Maya moved. She went to bed 3 first and talked the woman down with a quiet voice and her hand on the patient's arm until the initial panic passed. Then she went bed by bed, flashlight, cutting through the dark, checking battery readouts on every piece of life-sustaining equipment in the unit. The 2 cardiac patients were fine. The sepsis patient's pump was cycling on backup. The post-surgical cases were stable. Garrett Weston's ventilator showed 4 minutes and 40 seconds of battery remaining. Maya looked at that number for exactly as long as it took to understand what it meant. Then she went to the supply cart, pulled an adult bamboo bag, connected the mask attachment, and moved to his bedside. "Prater," she called toward the door. "I need both of you in here. Right now. We're trying to reach." "Now," Maya said. The word landed the way she intended it to, flat, unambiguous, no room for interpretation. Both officers came to the doorway. "The backup generator hasn't engaged," Maya said. "This patient's ventilator has less than minutes of battery power. When it fails, I need to manually ventilate him. While I'm doing that, I cannot watch the door, and I cannot watch the hallway. I need you two in this room, on either side of the door, watching for the man who just tried to kill him." "Shouldn't we wait for—" "There's no time to wait for anything," Maya said. "When that battery runs out, he stops breathing. I need your eyes on that hallway." Prater looked at the ventilator screen. The countdown now read 4 minutes and 8 seconds. He moved into position without another word. Maya checked the bamboo bag seal. Checked the mask fit against Garrett Weston's face. Checked the rate, 12 breaths per minute, the rate his ventilator had been set to, the rate she would replicate by hand. She had done this before, not in a darkened ICU. In a field surgical tent outside Kandahar, on a soldier whose airway had been compromised by a blast injury, with no power and no equipment, and nothing but her hands and her training, and the absolute refusal to let someone die because the circumstances were difficult. She had kept that soldier breathing for 22 minutes until the evacuation helicopter arrived. The ventilator alarm shifted pitch, the long, continuous tone that meant battery critical. Maya disconnected the circuit and began squeezing the bag. One squeeze, pause, 2 seconds, another squeeze in the corridor outside, somewhere past the security officers and the dark hallway and the screaming alarms. Something exploded. The blast was concussive, but contained the kind of directed charge that took out a door or a wall section, rather than a structural column. The ICU windows shuttered in their frames. Dust fell from the ceiling tiles. One of the cardiac monitors toppled from its wall bracket and shattered on the floor. Prater spun toward the hallway. "What the—" "Stay on the door," Maya said. She did not stop squeezing the bag. 1. Pause. 2. The flashlight beam from her pocket, angled now against the wall to light the room without blinding her, caught the smoke curling under the ICU door. Then it caught something else. A shape in the doorway. The man moved through the smoke with night vision goggles down over his eyes and a weapon in his right hand, and he moved the way soldiers moved in the dark low, fast, certain of exactly where he was going. He was going to bed 7. Prater raised his firearm. "Stop. Hands." The man swept the officer's arm aside with a movement so practiced it barely registered as violence and put his elbow into Prater's throat. Prater went down. The second officer managed to grab the man's weapon arm, and they struggled in the torsade, two shapes fighting in near-complete darkness, the only light coming from Maya's flashlight. Maya's light. She made a decision. She kept her left hand on the ambu bag, one squeeze, steady rhythm, and with her right hand, she grabbed the portable defibrillator from the crash cart beside the bed, flipped it on, and angled the device's diagnostic screen directly at the doorway at maximum brightness. The screen was not bright enough to blind an unprotected eye in a lit room. In pitch darkness, behind light-amplifying night vision equipment that was designed to gather and magnify every available photon, it functioned like a flashbang. The man made a sound she had never heard from a human being before, a sharp, involuntary sound, and staggered back into the doorframe, one hand going to his face. The second security officer, suddenly with an advantage he hadn't expected, drove his shoulder into the man's midsection and slammed him against the wall. Shots were fired. 2 of them in rapid succession, the muzzle flash strobing in the darkness. Maya did not stop squeezing the bag. 1. Pause. 2. Garrett Weston's chest rose and fell in the dark steady as a clock because her hand said it would. The sounds of the struggle reached a peak and then dropped suddenly to almost nothing. Heavy breathing, a body sliding down a wall, the ceramic crack of something hard hitting the floor. Then a beam of light cut across the ceiling as the second security officer retrieved his flashlight, and Maya could see the man on the floor of the doorway on his side. One arm bent underneath him, the night vision goggles knocked sideways on his face. He wasn't moving with purpose anymore. He was moving the way people moved when their body was trying to understand what had just happened to it. The second officer was on his radio. His voice was shaking slightly. "Officer down, ICU 6. Shots fired. I need EMS and tactical response to the 6th floor right now. I have a suspect down and I have an officer." He looked at Prater, who was on his knees with his hand at his throat, breathing in ragged pulls. "Officer is breathing. ICU is not secure. Send everything." Maya counted breaths. 1. Pause. 2. The man on the floor turned his head slowly in the darkness, and through the cracked lens of the night vision goggles, his eyes found her, the nurse, with the ambu bag in her hands, squeezing air into a man's lungs with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this in far worse conditions than this and was not going to stop until she was good and ready. The tactical response team breached the 6th floor at 3:31 a.m., 22 minutes after the power had gone out. They came up the stairwells in force, 12 officers in tactical gear with real flashlights and real authority, and the specific controlled energy of people arriving at a situation they had been briefed on while in transit. They swept the corridor, secured the ICU entrance, and called the all clear within 4 minutes. The emergency generators came online at 3:34 a.m. Every light in the building blazed back on. Every alarm reset. Every ventilator resumed automatic cycling. Maya held the ambu bag for another full minute after Garrett Weston's ventilator reconnected, watching the machine's numbers climb back to normal range, making sure the transition was clean and complete and exactly right. Then she set the bag on the supply cart, stripped her gloves, and wrote the time in her documentation. 3:35 a.m. Patient returned to mechanical ventilation. Vitals stable. No deterioration during manual ventilation period. The tactical team's lead officer stepped into the room and looked at the unconscious patient, the reconnected ventilator, the evidence bag on the counter with the syringe inside, and the nurse standing at the bedside filling out a chart. He looked at her for a long moment. "Are you the one who's been holding this room?" he said. "I'm his nurse," Maya said. "Is he stable?" She checked the monitor one more time. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, ventilator pressure curve. "He's stable," she said. The officer nodded slowly. He turned to look at the man who had been dragged to a seated position against the far wall of the corridor. His wrists now secured, his night vision goggles hanging around his neck by a single bent arm. Even from across the room, even in the aftermath of whatever had just happened to him, he was watching the doorway of bed 7 with an expression that Maya recognized. It was not defeat. It was calculation. And the specific cold thing in his eyes, when they moved from the doorway to Maya, told her something that the tactical officers and the security team and the administrators who would arrive in the morning would need a very long time to understand. This was not over. Whatever Garrett Weston knew, whatever he had seen or done, or carried back from wherever they'd sent him, someone had decided it was worth all of this. Worth the forged credentials and the planned blackout, and the coordinated attack on a federally protected patient in a locked ICU on the 6th floor of a hospital in the middle of a Tuesday night. And they had sent one man, which meant Maya understood with the particular clarity someone who had spent 3 years in places where the math of violence was very simple, that there were more. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and went back to her rounds. The tactical team moved through the unit like a current, deliberate, organized, sweeping each room with flashlights and quiet commands before clearing it and moving to the next. Maya worked around them the way she worked around everything that got in her way at Hartwell. She didn't wait for permission, and she didn't ask them to move. She checked her patients, updated her flow sheets, and flagged 2 medication adjustments that had been missed during the chaos because nobody else had been paying attention to anything except the man now sitting in zip-tie restraints in the hallway. His name, as it turned out, was not Victor Hale. She overheard that piece of information at 4:15 a. When a federal agent arrived on the 6th floor with a tablet and a conversation he conducted in a low voice just outside the nursing station, low enough that he probably thought nobody behind the counter could hear him. Maya had spent 3 years in surgical tents where the ambient noise was artillery fire and helicopter rotors, and she had learned to parse critical information out of environments considerably louder than a Pittsburgh hospital at 4 in the morning. The man's name in the federal system was Roland Fitch. He had 8 known aliases and a service record that had been redacted so thoroughly the agent described it as a document with a name on top and black bars all the way down. He had been arrested twice in the previous decade, once in Germany, once in South Korea, and released both times through mechanisms that the agent described as above my pay grade to explain He was a contractor, the specific kind of contractor whose services were purchased by people who needed problems solved without any documentation that the problems had ever existed. The problem he had been sent to solve was named Garrett Weston. Maya filed that away and went to check Garrett's ventilator pressure curve for the third time since power had been restored, because the circuit had been disconnected during the emergency and reconnected under less than ideal conditions. And she wanted to confirm the seal was clean. It was. She documented it. She also documented the fact that the attending physician had not yet appeared on the floor, despite being paged twice, and that the DoD protective detail, the two men who had been pulled away by the false emergency, had returned to their posts looking flushed and angry and had immediately gotten into a quiet, intense argument with the lead tactical officer that Maya could hear through the glass. She was not asked for her account of events until 5:20 a.m. The agent who came to find her was a woman mid-40s, dark blazer over a gray shirt, hair pulled back with the specific practicality of someone who had stopped thinking about it. She introduced herself as Special Agent Diane Farrow from the FBI's Organized Crime and National Security Division. And she had the kind of face that had probably been warm once and had been trained into neutrality over a long career. "I understand you're the nurse who intervened," Farrow said. "I'm the nurse who was doing her job," Maya said. "They're not always the same thing, but tonight they were." Farrow looked at her for a moment. Then she pulled out a recorder, set it on the counter, and said, "Walk me through it from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Maya walked her through it. She was precise and chronological, and she did not editorialize, because she had learned years ago that the fastest way to get someone to stop listening to you was to give them more information than they had asked for. She described the badge access log entry, the unlabeled syringe, the viscosity of the fluid, the tactical gloves, the way Fitch had moved toward the IV line without looking at the patient, the power failure, the battery countdown, the ambu bag, the defibrillator screen. When she finished, Farrow was quiet for a moment. "The defibrillator," she said. "The diagnostics screen, maximum brightness, against night vision amplification. It's not a complicated principle." "No," Farrow said. "It's not. It's also something most nurses wouldn't have thought of. Most nurses haven't worked in forward operating bases." Farrow glanced down at her notes. "You served 3 years. Combat Medic Army. 2 tours. Where Kandahar. Then Mosul." Farrow wrote something down. She had a particular quality of stillness that Maya recognized from the best officers she'd served under, the kind that meant she was absorbing information rather than just collecting it. "The syringe you bagged. We're running the substance now. Preliminary analysis suggests a synthetic potassium compound, fast-acting, cardiac-specific, clears the system within 2 hours. Cause of death would present as acute cardiac arrest." Maya had already concluded something along those lines. She didn't say that. She waited. "There's no paperwork that would have caught it," Farrow continued. "If Fitch had completed the injection, Weston would have coded within minutes. By the time the autopsy flagged anything, the compound would have metabolized. It would have looked like a complication of his existing injuries. And nobody would have questioned it," Maya said. "Because people in his condition code sometimes." "It happens." "Yes," Farrow said, which is exactly what someone counted on. They looked at each other across the nursing station counter. "I need to ask you something," Farrow said, and her voice shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more direct. "And I need you to think carefully before you answer, because the answer matters." "Go ahead. In the days you've been caring for this patient, have you noticed anything unusual? Anything beyond tonight? Anyone who seemed out of place? Any access patterns that struck you as odd? Any communication through the patient's room that you weren't expecting?" Maya thought about it. Actually thought about it, which took longer than a reflexive denial. 8 days ago," she said slowly, "there was a technician who came to calibrate the ventilator. Standard maintenance. But he came at 1 a.m., which is an unusual time for scheduled maintenance. And he spent about 6 minutes in the room, which is about 4 minutes longer than ventilator calibration takes. I noted it in my shift log, but the supervisor told me it had been scheduled through a biomedical engineering and not to worry about it. Pharaoh's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Do you still have that log entry? Every shift log I've written for 8 days is in the unit's documentation system. The hospital's IT department can pull them. I'll need copies of all of them, Pharaoh said. Maya nodded. That was the easy part. The hard part arrived at 6:15 a.m. in the form of Dr. Raymond Alderman, the chief medical officer of Hartwell Regional Medical Center, who stepped off the elevator onto the 6th floor wearing a coat over his pajamas and an expression that suggested he had been woken up at an hour that offended him personally. He was a tall man, early 60s, with the particular confidence of someone who had spent 30 years being the most important person in any room he entered. He looked at the tactical team, at the evidence markers in the hallway, at the federal agents moving through his ICU, and then he looked at Maya. You, he said. It was not a greeting. Dr. Alderman, she said. My office has been receiving calls for the last 2 hours about a situation you apparently attempted to manage without consulting anyone above your pay grade. He kept his voice low, but the anger in it was vivid. You interfered with a credentialed physician's access to a protected patient. You caused a lockdown. You removed a patient from mechanical ventilation during a power emergencies. I manually ventilated him during a power emergency, Maya said. He never stopped being ventilated. And you apparently discharged a medical device as some kind of weapon. I used the diagnostic screen of a defibrillator to temporarily overwhelm the light amplification equipment of an armed assassin who was about to shoot a patient. Those are all accurate descriptions of what I did. Alderman stared at her. He had the look of a man who had prepared a speech on the way over and was now watching the speech fail to apply to the actual situation. The man you credentialed as Victor Hale, Maya said, is a federal contractor named Roland Fitch, with 8 known aliases and a history of targeted killings across 2 continents. His badge credentials were created using a stolen identity routed through your administrative system. I don't know yet whether that happened because your system was compromised or because someone inside this hospital helped him. But the FBI is currently investigating both possibilities. Alderman's face went through several stages. I was told the credentials were verified through standard DoD channels. By whom? By my administrative coordinator. Which one? A pause. Patricia Vane. Agent Pharaoh, Maya called, without raising her voice. Pharaoh appeared from around the corner with the speed of someone who had been close enough to hear the conversation. Dr. Alderman, Pharaoh said, producing her identification with a smooth efficiency that suggested she had done this particular motion thousands of times. I need to speak with you about your administrative credentialing process, and specifically about an employee named Patricia Vane. Do you have time right now, or would you prefer I send agents to your office at opening? Alderman looked at Maya one more time. Whatever he had planned to say to her collapsed under the weight of the situation, and he turned to Pharaoh and said, "Now is fine," in a voice that had lost most of its authority. Maya went back to her documentation. The day shift arrived at 7. The charge nurse on days was a woman named Brenda Hollis, who had 15 years at Hartwell and a manner that communicated exactly how much she thought of the night team without ever saying it directly. She walked into the unit, looked at the federal agents, looked at the evidence markers, looked at the tactical gear still stacked in the corridor, and then found Maya at the nursing station. "What happened?" she said. "It's in my incident report," Maya said. "I'll brief you verbally before I leave, but the full documentation is in the system. I heard you pulled a patient off the vent. I manually ventilated a patient when the power failed, and the battery reserve ran out. He was never without ventilatory support. Brenda's expression was the specific combination of impressed and reluctant that Maya had seen on many faces in her life, people who had decided something about her before they had any information and were now processing facts that didn't fit the conclusion. The day attending is going to need to review the chart before anything. The chart is complete and current, Maya said. Every intervention, every vital, every medication, every equipment status, documented in real time. The attending can review it in about 10 minutes. Brenda looked at the chart on the screen. Read through it. Her expression didn't shift, but she stopped talking, which was the version of acknowledgement Maya had learned to accept. Maya's shift officially ended at 7:30 a.m. She did not leave at 7:30. She stayed because the day team didn't know Garrett Weston's baselines the way she didn't know that his systolic ran points about 8 below the average for his age and build. Didn't know that his ventilator pressure curve had a characteristic shape that had been consistent across 8 nights, and any deviation from it was worth noting. Didn't know that his pupils, when checked, responded with a slight asymmetry on the left that the neurology team had noted and monitored and determined was stable, but that any day nurse checking reflexively might flag as deterioration when it was actually normal for him. She stayed and wrote an addendum to the handoff notes, covering all of it. She stayed until the attending physician, a hospitalist named Dr. Camila Osi, who was covering the ICU rotation, and who, unlike Alderman, actually read the chart before she walked into a room, had reviewed everything and confirmed she understood Garrett's baselines. "You were on all night," Osi said, looking at the timestamp on the documentation. "Yes, and you stayed 2 hours past shift to write the handoff." The situation was complicated. Osi studied her for a moment. She was younger than Maya by a few years, with the kind of precise attention that good intensivists developed or washed out trying. "I read what you did last night, the manual ventilation. It was the appropriate intervention. For 22 minutes, for however long it took," Maya said. "That's how it works." Osi nodded slowly, in the manner of someone who was recalibrating something. "Go home," she said. "Sleep, I've got him." Maya gathered her bag from her locker. She changed out of her scrubs into the clothes she'd left in there the previous. Evening jeans, a gray sweater, her worn-out running shoes, and she was almost at the elevator when Agent Farrow fell into step beside her. "We found Patricia Vane," Farrow said. Maya kept walking. "She's in the hospital. Admitted yesterday afternoon through the ED. Apparent anxiety attack, kept for observation. She was in a room on the 3rd floor when all of this happened." Maya slowed slightly. She was already inside the building. "Yes. We believe she was placed here to serve as internal support in case Fitch needed access to building systems. The power failure required someone with physical access to the generator control room. The room she was placed in is directly adjacent to the stairwell that accesses that level." The elevator opened. Maya stepped in and held the door. "Is she talking?" "Not yet. But she's scared, and when people are scared enough, they usually make a calculation." Farrow stepped in beside her. "There's something else. Fitch wasn't working alone beyond Vane. We recovered a communication device from his gear encrypted, but our technical team broke the cipher within about 40 minutes. There were 3 contacts. One of them initiated the contract. One of them was Vane. One of them is someone who currently has active credentials inside this hospital." The elevator descended. "Someone who's still in the building," Maya said. "Someone who came on shift this morning," Farrow said. "Someone whose credentials are legitimate, not forged, not stolen. Actual hospital credentials, issued through proper channels. Which means whoever it is has been here long enough and positioned well enough to have built a real identity here." Maya thought about that. Thought about 8 days of overnight shifts. 8 days of the same corridors, the same faces, the same rotation of staff coming and going around Garrett Weston's room. "I've been the only consistent presence on nights for 8 days," she said. "I know. which means I've seen everyone who's come through that unit at night. Which is why, Pharaoh said, I'd like you to sit down with my team this morning and go through every face you remember. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened onto the main entrance atrium, where the early morning light was beginning to push through the tall glass panels at the front of the building, and the cleaning staff were running their machines in slow loops across the tile floor, and everything looked exactly as ordinary as a hospital lobby was supposed to look. Give me an hour, Maya said. I need coffee and I need to eat something. Then I'll come back and sit with your team. Take 2 hours, Pharaoh said. You've earned them. Maya walked out of the hospital and into the February air, which was sharp and cold and smelled like exhaust from the delivery entrance around the corner, which was not romantic in the slightest. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was something Kandahar had given her and never asked back. But her shoulders were tight in a way she hadn't noticed during the shift, and her feet hurt, and she was hungry in the deep, hollow way that came from 8 hours of sustained high alert functioning with nothing more than a granola bar at midnight. She found a diner 2 blocks from the hospital that was already open, the kind of place, with a laminated menu and coffee that had been on the burner since 5 a.m. and tasted like it. She ordered eggs and toast and sat in a booth by the window and watched the street while she ate. She was thinking about the third contact on Roland Fitch's communication device, someone with legitimate credentials and a real identity inside Hartwell Regional Medical Center. Someone who had watched Garrett Weston for long enough to understand the rhythms of his care and the gaps in his security. Someone who had been present during 8 days of Maya's overnight shifts and had watched her work and had, presumably, included her in their calculation of obstacles. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway and ordered a second cup and kept thinking. She thought about the ventilator technician at 1A. She thought about the shift supervisor who had told her not to worry about it. She thought about Patricia Vane, placed in a hospital room on the 3rd floor, like a piece on a board. She thought about the specific, meticulous planning that had gone into an operation sophisticated enough to breach a federally protected ICU and still fail because of one nurse on an overnight shift who had spent 3 years learning to notice when something was wrong. She thought about what Fitch had said when she'd blocked the IV line. You have no idea what you just did. She had at the time understood it as a threat. It's like sitting in the diner with bad coffee. Now sitting in the diner with bad coffee and February light coming through the window, she turned the sentence over and looked at it from different angles. You have no idea what you just did. Not you don't know what I'll do to you. Not a personal threat. About scope. About consequence. About something larger than one nurse and one patient and one night. Garrett Weston had come back from somewhere carrying something. Not a wound, not a physical thing information. The kind that people built elaborate operations to destroy before it could surface. The kind that made a man worth killing in a locked ICU with a syringe designed to look like a natural death. And Maya had stopped that killing, which meant whatever Garrett Weston carried, it was still intact. Still inside him, behind the sedation and the TBI and the ventilator, waiting for him to wake up. She paid for her breakfast and walked back to the hospital. Pharaoh's team had set up in a conference room on the 2nd floor, not the administrative wing, which was already buzzing with the particular anxious energy of institutions discovering they had a serious problem, but a clinical conference room off the hospitalist corridor that had a whiteboard, a projector, and a door that locked. There were 4 agents inside: Pharaoh, a younger man named Tate, who managed the technical systems, and 2 others whose roles hadn't been introduced, but whose manner communicated investigative rather than tactical. On the whiteboard was a list of names. Maya recognized most of them as Hartwell staff: nursing, administrative, security, biomedical engineering. We cross-referenced the badge access logs for the 6th floor against the encrypted communication timestamps on Fitch's device, Tate explained, pulling up the data on his laptop. Every time one of these contacts sent a message, someone with hospital credentials badged into or out of a specific access point. It gives us a window, not a name, but it narrows the field to 11 people who were in the right location at the right time for every message. 11, Maya said, looking at the list. We're down to 7 after we eliminated the DoD protective detail. They're accounted for, their communications were monitored independently and cleared. That leaves 7 hospital staff members who fit the access pattern. Maya looked at the 7 names on the board. She had worked alongside most of them at some point during the past 8 days. She read each name carefully and said nothing until she had read all 7. Then she pointed to one of them. This one, she said. Farrow looked at her. Why? Because the ventilator technician who came at 1A. 8 days ago, he signed the biomedical engineering log in a specific way. First initial, last name, employee number. I remember the number because I checked it when I noted the visit in my shift log. She looked at the name on the board. That's his number. Silence in the conference room. You remember a biomedical engineering employee number from 8 days ago, Tate said. I have a good memory for numbers, Maya said. It's useful in medication dosing. Tate looked at Farrow. Farrow looked at the board. Then she said, pull his file. The file came up on Tate's screen in about 40 seconds. The biomedical engineering technician's name was Dennis Harker. He had worked at Hartwell for 3 years. Clean employment record, no disciplinary flags, professional references that all checked out. A photograph that matched the description Maya gave of the man who had come to calibrate Garrett Weston's ventilator 8 days ago. He's on shift right now, Tate said, reading from the schedule on the screen. Farrow was already reaching for her radio. Don't spook him, Maya said quickly. Farrow stopped. If he knows we're looking at him, he'll alert whoever hired him. And whoever hired him is the person who initiated the contract on Garrett's life. You want the contractor, not the errand runner. She kept her voice level. If Harker has been running communications for Fitch, then Fitch's capture changes his calculus significantly. He's either going to try to run, or he's going to try to complete the objective through a different means. Either way, you want to know which one before you move. Farrow studied her. You're suggesting we use him. I'm suggesting you watch him for the next few hours before you pick him up. Because the person who hired Fitch doesn't know yet exactly how much information Fitch gave up before he was taken into custody. And if Harker is in contact with that person, the conversation he has in the next few hours is going to be considerably more useful to your investigation than anything you're going to get from arresting him in a supply closet. The room was quiet. She's not wrong, Tate said, not looking up from his screen. Farrow sat back in her chair. She looked at Maya for a long moment, the look of someone reassessing a person they had already assessed, and finding the original assessment insufficient. How long were you Army? 7 years total. 3 combat deployment. The rest stateside, training, and you left to be a nurse. I left to do what I trained to do, Saya said. Take care of people who needed it. Farrow nodded very slowly. She reached for the whiteboard marker and circled Dennis Harker's name. We watch him, she said. 3 agents on rotation. Nobody moves without my direct order, and I want eyes on Weston's room every minute. She looked at Maya. You said you know his baselines better than anyone on days. I do. We may need you back on the floor tonight. Maya thought about the bad coffee and the February cold and the 11 hours she'd already been awake. She thought about Garrett Weston's ventilator pressure curve and the slight asymmetry in his left pupil response and the 8 days of data that lived in her memory as clearly as a chart. I'll be there at 11, she said. She was almost to the door when Tate's voice stopped her. Ms. Bennett. She turned. He He was looking at his screen with the expression of someone who had just found something they weren't expecting. The communication device we recovered from Fitch, the last message sent before his arrest. The timestamp is 3:08 a.m., 1 minute after you first confronted him in Weston's room. What did it say? Tate looked up from the screen. His voice was flat, careful, delivering information without interpretation. It says, "Nurse is a problem. Needs to be handled." The room absorbed that. Maya felt something move through her, not fear, exactly. Something older and colder than fear, the thing that lived underneath it that she had first met in a surgical tent in Kandahar and had never fully said goodbye to since. "And the response?" she said. Tate's eyes went back to the screen. He read it. Then he looked at her again, and this time his expression had changed into something that she could not immediately categorize. The response came in at 3:09, 12 seconds after the first message. What does it say? It says, "Already handled. Already handled." Maya stood in the conference room and let those two words sit in the air for a moment, the way you let a sound sit after you've heard it, but haven't yet decided what to do with it. "Handled how?" she said. "We don't know yet," Tate said. The communication chain goes dark after that. Whoever sent the response either switched devices or went to a different channel. "So someone was told I was a problem," Maya said, and someone else confirmed it was already handled. "Before anything had happened to me." Yes. Which means they didn't plan to handle me after Fitch encountered me. They planned for the possibility that someone would interfere before Fitch got to Weston. They had a contingency. The room was very quiet. Farrow was looking at the whiteboard. Tate was looking at his screen. Neither of them was looking at Maya. Neither of them was looking at Maya, which told her they had already had part of this conversation before she walked back into the building. The contingency was already in motion at 3:09 a.m., Maya said. "What's been done to me since 3:09 a.m.? Farrow finally turned from the whiteboard. "Your personnel file was accessed at 4:22 a.m. through an administrative terminal on the 4th floor. Whoever accessed it pulled your full employment record, your emergency contacts, your home address, and your vehicle registration information." Maya absorbed that. "My home address. We have a unit there now," Farrow said. "Your apartment is secure. There was no intrusion. But whoever pulled that file has your information." She paused. "We'd like you to consider staying somewhere else until this is resolved." Resolved meaning Harker is in custody, and you have the person who hired Fitch. Yes. Maya thought about her apartment, the 3rd floor of a building on Warwick Street, 2 miles from the hospital, a place she'd lived for 4 years and had never once thought of as a target. She thought about the lock on the front door, which was a standard pin tumbler that any competent person could defeat in under a minute, and the fact that she lived alone, and the fact that someone with access to her home address had confirmed at 3:09 a.m. that she was already handled. "I'll stay at the hospital," she said. "There are on-call rooms on the 3rd floor. Maya, I'm safer here than anywhere else right now," she said. "Because your team is here and Harker is here. And whoever gave that response at 3:09 is almost certainly monitoring the situation closely, enough that moving me creates more exposure than keeping me stationary." She looked at Farrow. "And I'm not leaving Weston." Farrow looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Get some sleep. We'll have someone outside the on-call room." Maya slept for 5 hours, which was 2 more than she usually managed between back-to-back shifts and 3 fewer than she actually needed. She woke at 1:30 p.m. to a text from Tate that said simply, "Harker made a call at 12:47. Tracing it now. Sit tight." She sat tight for approximately 20 minutes, then showered in the on-call bathroom, changed back into her scrubs from her locker, and went to check on Garrett Weston because nobody had told her she couldn't. The day team was running a standard afternoon assessment when she arrived. OC was reviewing a lab panel at the nursing station. Garrett's ventilator settings hadn't been adjusted since the night before good, because there had been no clinical indication to adjust them. His intracranial pressure was within acceptable range. His liver function panels were trending in the right direction. The TBI protocol was stable. He looked, lying there behind the glass, exactly like a man who had no idea that two people had tried to kill him in the last 12 hours, and at least one more was somewhere in the building right now, waiting for a second opportunity. Maya went back to the on-call room. Farrow came at 3:15. Harker's call went to a prepaid number registered to a convenience store in Braddock, she said. Sitting in the single chair across from the bed where Maya was eating crackers from a vending machine because the cafeteria was 3 floors away and she didn't want to be that far from the 6th floor. The number was purchased 6 weeks ago. Tower data puts the receiving phone within a 2-mile radius of downtown Pittsburgh at the time of the call, but it's been powered off since. We're not going to locate it that way. What did Harker say on the call? Farrow hesitated for just a fraction of a second. He said Fitch was down and in federal custody. He said the nurse was still in the building and apparently cooperating with the investigation. He asked for instructions, and the response was 3 words. Stay in place. Then the line went dead. Stay in place. Maya turned that over. They're not done. They told him to stay because they're planning another attempt. That's our assessment. When? We don't know. Fitch was their primary asset. Whoever hired him is improvising now. Farrow leaned forward in the chair. Here's what we do know. We found a secondary communication record. A message sent from the same channel that responded to Fitch's 3-9 message. This one went out at 6:40 a.m., about an hour and a half after you sat down with my team. It was sent to 3 recipients. We've identified 2 of them as external people outside the hospital. The 3rd we haven't identified yet. What did the message say? Farrow looked at her evenly. It said, Phase 1 failed. Execute contingency. Weston must not reach debrief. Maya set down the crackers. Debrief. That was the word that reorganized everything, the word that explained why Garrett Weston was worth killing in a locked ICU with a compound that metabolized before autopsy. He wasn't just carrying information. He was scheduled to deliver it to someone. And someone else needed that delivery to never happen. When is the debrief? Maya said. I can't, Agent Farrow. When is it? Farrow's jaw tightened slightly. He was scheduled for transfer to a secure military medical facility in Virginia on Friday. The debrief was scheduled for 48 hours post-transfer, contingent on his neurological status. Today was Wednesday. 48 hours, Maya said. Give or take. Then that's the window. Whoever sent that message has 48 hours to complete the objective before Weston is out of reach inside a military facility. Yes, and Harker is still in the building, under surveillance, but still in the building, still in contact with whoever sent that message. Maya stood up. You need to move Weston. We can't move him. His medical status is stable enough for short-distance transport within the facility. Move him to a different room, a different floor, a room that isn't on any access log Harker has seen. Change the room number in the hospital system and lock the update behind a clearance level Harker can't reach. Make Harker think Weston is still in bed 7 on the 6th floor while he's actually somewhere else. Because whatever the contingency plan is, it's built around the room they know. Farrow was quiet for a moment. That's not a bad idea. It's a necessary idea, Maya said, and I need to be the one who moves him. Why? Because I know his baselines and I know his equipment. And an emergency room transfer of a ventilator-dependent TBI patient is not something you hand to a day nurse who's known him for 8 hours. The transfer has to look routine from the outside. If anyone is watching the 6th floor, they need to see normal activity. And normal activity on the 6th floor at night is me. Farrow studied her for a long moment. You understand that if we do this and the contingency plan involves Harker making a move tonight, you're going to be directly in the path of that move. I've been in the path of it since 9 a.m. Maya said. At least this way I know where it's coming from. The transfer was approved by 5 p.m. through a chain of authorizations that moved fast enough that Maya understood Pharaoh had been planning to suggest something similar and had just needed someone else to say it first. Garrett Weston was moved at 6:45 p.m. during the shift change window when the hospital's corridors were at their most populated, and a bed being moved by a nurse and a respiratory therapist read as completely ordinary. He went from bed 7 on the 6th floor to a room on the 4th floor that was normally used for post-procedure recovery and had been cleared and prepared by Pharaoh's team during the afternoon. The room had a separate badge access point and a direct line to the federal staging area that Pharaoh's team had established in the basement. In the electronic system visible to standard hospital credentials, Garrett Weston was still in 7 beds on the 6th floor. Dennis Harker would see that. Dennis Harker would pass it along, and whoever received that information would plan. Accordingly, Maya started her shift at 7 p.m. She worked the 6th floor as if nothing had changed, because on the 6th floor, for the patients who were actually there, nothing had changed. The 2 cardiac patients, the sepsis case, whose urine output was finally trending up, the stroke patient who had successfully not pulled out her NG tube for 18 consecutive hours and was receiving quiet congratulations from Maya every time she checked on her. The 2 post-surgical cases. Bed 7, which was empty and dark behind its glass panel with a ventilator running at minimal settings to generate data on the monitoring system. A piece of theater designed to look like an occupied room to anyone who checked the numbers from a distance. At 8:15 p.m., Maya noticed that the biomedical engineering request log had a new entry. Ventilator calibration. Bed 7. Scheduled for 10:30 p.m. The technician assigned was Dennis Harker. She called Pharaoh immediately. "I see it," Pharaoh said. The line had a quality of controlled tension, the kind that happened when a team of people had been watching a monitor and had just watched something they were waiting for finally move. He submitted the order himself through the standard system. Either he doesn't know we're watching or he doesn't care. Or he knows, and he submitted it anyway, because the order came from above him and he doesn't have a choice, Maya said. A pause on the line. That's possible. If he's scared enough of whoever hired Fitch failing to complete the assignment is worse than getting caught attempting it. People in that situation make moves they'd otherwise consider too risky. She was watching the nursing station screen, the ventilator readout from bed 7, still scrolling its quiet data. He's going to go into that room at 10:30 and find it empty. When he does, one of 2 things happens. He panics and runs, or he contacts whoever sent the stay-in-place order and tells them Weston is gone. Either way, we're ready to take him, Pharaoh said. If he runs, yes. But if he contacts his handler before you can intercept the communications, then the handler knows Weston has been moved, and the handler starts looking for where he went, Maya said. Another pause. Longer. You think they can find him? I think they found him at Hartwell in the first place, which means they have access to information systems we haven't fully mapped yet. I think moving him bought time, not certainty. She lowered her voice. I think the 4th floor room needs to be treated as potentially compromised from the moment Harker discovers bed 7 is empty. I'll reposition assets to the 4th floor, Pharaoh said. And Bennett stay away from bed 7 at 10:30. Let us handle Harker. Understood, Maya said. She was at the nursing station at 10:30 doing her medication reconciliation when Harker badged into the 6th floor ICU. She watched him on the unit's internal camera, a square-jawed man in his mid-30s in biomedical engineering scrubs, carrying a calibration case that looked exactly the same case he'd carried 8 days ago. He moved with a specific kind of forced normalcy, the deliberate casual stride of someone trying very hard to look like they belonged. He went to bed 7. He was inside for 40 seconds before he came back out. His face, when he emerged, had lost the forced normalcy completely. He stood in the ICU corridor for a moment, and Maya, watching from her screen, could see the calculation happening behind his face, the rapid reorganization of a plan that had just encountered an obstacle. He pulled out a phone, not his hospital-issued phone, a second device, small and dark, that came from his inner breast pocket. He typed something. Pharaoh's voice came over Maya's earpiece. They'd given her one at the start of the shift. A small thing that sat almost invisibly in her left ear. We see it. We're pulling the communication. Moving on Harker now. 2 federal agents appeared at the end of the ICU corridor 20 seconds later. Harker saw them, and for a moment his body went through the specific physics of a person's deciding whether to run, and then the specific physics of a person deciding that running into a locked hospital unit at night was not an option that led anywhere useful. He stood still and let them approach. The communication he had sent was intercepted before it reached its destination. The message read, "Subject not in assigned location. Confirm status." The response, which came in before Harker's phone, could be secured, read, confirmed. Location updated. Proceed to contingency. Contingency. Tate's voice came over the channel. They know where Weston is. Someone just updated his location in a system that's not our system. Pharaoh, Sharp, how is that possible? We locked the room transfer behind clearance. Not every system, Tate said. The respiratory therapy scheduling platform runs on a separate server. The transfer generated an automatic equipment reservation on the 4th floor that's visible to anyone with respiratory therapy credentials. A beat of silence on the channel. Who has respiratory therapy credentials in this building right now? Maya said. She was already pulling up the on-shift roster on the nursing station terminal as she asked it. Respiratory therapy. Night shift. 2 therapists currently signed into the building. One of them had been present on the 6th floor during Garrett Weston's initial admission 8 days ago and had accessed his chart 4 times since routine for a vented patient. The others had signed in at 7 p.m. and had not yet appeared on any floor for any assigned patient. Pharaoh, Maya said, keeping her voice level. 4th floor. Right now. She took the stairs because the elevator was too slow and too confined and too visible, hitting the 4th floor door at a controlled run that she slowed to a walk the moment she came through into the corridor, because running in a hospital at night was the kind of thing that drew attention. The 4th floor was quieter than the 6th. The post-procedure recovery rooms ran at a lower census overnight, and the nursing station was staffed by a single nurse covering the wing. The room where Garrett Weston had been placed was at the far end of the corridor, behind the second set of fire doors. Pharaoh's agents were repositioning. Maya had heard that on the channel. Repositioning meant they weren't there yet. She pushed through the fire doors. The corridor on the other side was dim. The nighttime lighting protocol on this floor ran at half power after 9 p.m. to support patient sleep. The room at the end was behind a closed door. The badge reader on the door showed a green light, which meant it had been accessed recently, within the last few minutes. Maya had her hospital badge in her hand. She stopped 3 feet from the door and listened. Ventilator, cycling at the correct rate, the rate she knew, as well as she knew her own heartbeat. And underneath it, another sound. Movement. The specific quality of someone, moving with intention to be quiet. She badged through the door. The room was dim. The monitor, backlights, provided most of the light, which was how Garrett Weston's rooms always looked at night. He was in the bed, exactly where he'd been placed. Ventilator running, vitals displayed in the soft glow of the monitoring system. At the head of the bed, in the position that someone would need to be in to access the central line port or the medication administration port without being visible from the door's window, was a figure in respiratory therapy scrubs with a device in their hand that was not a respiratory therapy device. It was a syringe, the same viscous clear fill, no label. They had a second dose. Maya's voice came out flat and clear, the way it had come out in very specific moments, in very specific places over the last decade of her life. Put it down. The figure turned. It was a woman, late 30s, dark hair pulled back, with the specific expression of someone who had been caught and was now running through options. Her eyes went to Maya, to the door, to the hallway visible through the door's glass panel, and back to Maya. "You're the nurse," the woman said. "I'm the nurse," Maya confirmed. "Put the syringe on the bed rail and step away from the IV line. You need to walk away from this." "I've been told that before," Maya said. It didn't work the first time. The woman's hand tightened on the syringe. Maya tracked the hand, not the face. Was going to show her what the woman wanted her to see, but the hand was going to show her what the woman was actually going to do. The hand was moving, very slowly, toward the IV port. "Last time," Maya said, the hand kept moving. Maya crossed the room in 2 steps and caught the woman's wrist with both hands, not a grab, a lock, the specific grip from combatives training that controlled the joint without requiring significant strength differential to maintain. The syringe skidded across the bed rail. The woman drove her elbow back hard and caught Maya across the cheekbone, a solid hit that sent a bright burst of pain through the left side of her face and knocked her half a step sideways. She did not let go of the wrist. They went into the wall together, not violently, not the cinematic crash of 2 people fighting, but the controlled, grinding struggle of 2 people who were both trying to control the same piece of space. The woman was strong, and she had trained. Maya could feel it in the resistance of her body, the way she was trying to create leverage rather than just muscle through the grip. Maya adjusted her weight and took the woman's elbow in the wrong direction. A controlled application of force to a joint that was not designed to rotate that way produced a sound and a result that ended the struggle efficiently and without any of the narrative drama that surrounded it. The woman went to her knees and Maya stood over her, with one hand still on the compromised arm and her back to Garrett Weston's bed, which was where she needed to be. The syringe was on the floor, intact, uncapped but uninjected. Garrett Weston's vitals on the monitor had not changed. Pharaoh's agents came through the door 17 seconds later. 17 seconds was not a long time in most contexts. In that room, in that dim light, with a second dose of a cardiac-specific synthetic compound 3 feet from a ventilator-dependent Navy SEAL, 17 seconds had been the precise distance between the world staying as it was and the world becoming something else entirely. The woman on the floor was identified in the next hour. As Soren Vallis, the name rang no immediate bells for anyone except Tate, who pulled it out of a federal database with a look on his face that suggested he recognized it and was not pleased about what he recognized. She had legitimate respiratory therapy credentials, a 3-year employment history at Hartwell, and, according to Tate's database, a prior professional identity as a contract operative who had worked under 4 other names in 3 other countries. She was not talking. Fitch had not been talking either, and that particular silence was now looking less like professional discipline and more like genuine fear of a third party whose consequence for failure outweighed whatever federal charges were on the table. Maya sat in a chair outside Garrett Weston's 4th-floor room, while Pharaoh's team processed the scene inside, and she held a cold pack to her left cheekbone, which was swelling in the specific way that a direct elbow strike produced not a cut. Just a bloom of pressure under the skin that was going to look spectacular by morning. The agent stationed at the door had offered her an ice pack with the slightly guilty look of someone who had arrived 17 seconds too late and knew it. Tate came out of the room at midnight and sat down in the chair next to her. "Harker's talking," he said. "What's he saying?" "Enough. He was recruited 8 months ago, through a contact he describes as a consultant. He never met his handler in person. Everything through encrypted channels. He was paid in 3 installments, one on recruitment, one when Fitch successfully infiltrated the building, the first time to assess Weston's room layout, one pending on Weston's death." He paused. The third installment was supposed to come from an account in Luxembourg. We've been working with Treasury to trace the account since this morning. And Tate looked at the wall across from him. He had the expression of someone deciding how much to say. The account traces back through 6 shell companies in 4 jurisdictions. It's going to take time to unravel completely. But the second-to-last company in the chain is registered to a holding entity with ties to the defense contracting sector. He paused. Specifically, ties to an oversight committee that has access to Garrett Weston's classified operational files. Maya looked at him. Someone on the oversight committee. Someone with access to the files. That's not necessarily the same thing as someone on the committee. But it narrows the field significantly. He looked at his hands. What Weston knows, whatever he came back with someone at that level, doesn't want to get to the debrief on Friday. Maya thought about that. Thought about the layers of it, not just the money and the contracts and the shell companies, but the specific calculus that had produced all of this, the forged credentials and the stolen identity and the planted hospital employee and the backup operative and the synthetic compound and the encrypted messages and the 48-hour window. Someone had decided that a man recovering from a traumatic brain injury in a Pittsburgh ICU was dangerous enough to warrant all of it. Someone who had enough institutional access to read Weston's files and enough operational reach to put Roland Fitch in a hospital room at 3A. M. Tate, she said. Yeah. The message that came in after Harker reported Weston was gone from bed 7. The one that said confirmed, location updated, proceed to contingency. That message had to come from someone who could access the respiratory therapy scheduling system in real time. That's not a contracted operative accessing it from outside. That's someone with inside access to hospital systems. Tate went still. Harker and Vallis, Maya said. They were the operational assets inside the hospital. But somebody was running logistics from outside the building, pulling data in real time and pushing instructions. The communication device we recovered from Fitch had 3 contacts. You identified 2 external and 1 unknown inside the hospital. She looked at him. The unknown contact. Was it Harker? We assumed. Pull the timestamp comparison again. Map every message Harker sent against the messages from the unknown contact. Tate was already reaching for his laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard in the specific, efficient pattern of someone who had done this before and was running the analysis. Because the question had just become extremely urgent. He stopped. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at Maya with an expression that had left whatever composure he'd started the night with somewhere back in the conference room on the 2nd floor. They don't overlap, he said. No. The unknown contact sent 6 messages tonight. Harker accounted for 2 of them. Vallis, with her device, accounted for 2 more. He stared at the screen. There are 2 messages from tonight that we can't account for. From a contact who is still active, who sent the location update that led Vallis to the 4th floor. He looked up. There's a 3rd person in this building, Maya. Someone we haven't found yet. The cold pack in her hand had gone warm. She set it down on the floor beside the chair. Down the corridor, through the 4th floor fire doors, the elevator bank hummed to life, the soft mechanical sound of a car arriving at a floor that, at 12:15 in the morning, should have had no reason to receive a visitor. Maya was on her feet before the elevator's sound finished registering. Tate. She kept her voice below a carrying level. Who has access to this floor right now? Who's badged in since the transfer? His fingers were already moving. Farrow's team, the floor nurse, the on-call hospitalist, you, he scrolled, and 1 other badge entry at 11:52 p.m. Employee ID traces to a Dr. Leonard Marsh, staff cardiologist. No cardiology patients on this floor tonight. Where is he now? Badge shows he entered the floor. Hasn't badged out. Maya looked at the fire doors at the end of the corridor. The elevator was on this side of those doors. She could hear it. The mechanical settling of a car that had arrived and opened. No footsteps yet. Whoever had come out of that elevator was either standing still or moving very quietly. "Pharaoh," she said into her earpiece. Static. Then Pharaoh's voice, slightly compressed. "I hear you. We're one floor up, coming down the stairwell now. Marsh, we flagged him 20 minutes ago. He's the CMO's former cardiology director. Left Hartwell 8 months ago under a voluntary resignation that our team is now looking at very differently. He still has active badge credentials. Administrative oversight. His termination was processed, but the badge deactivation request was never completed." A pause, and in that pause, Maya could hear Pharaoh moving, the sounds of a stairwell. 2 minutes. 2 minutes was 2 minutes. "There's an agent at the door," Tate said quietly, meaning the agent who had given Maya the ice pack and was now standing 6 feet away, looking at both of them, with the alertness of someone who had caught up to the situation. "Stay on the door," Maya told him. She meant Garrett Weston's door. The agent understood and moved back into position. Then the fire doors at the end of the corridor opened. Leonard Marsh was a compact man, somewhere in his late 50s, with the kind of face that read as professionally benign until you looked at it in a low-light hospital corridor at Totspital Corridor at 12:15 in the morning and understood that whatever benign quality it normally carried had been left somewhere else tonight. He was in street clothes, dark jacket, dark trousers, and he was walking with the specific purposeful stride of a man who had planned to be somewhere and intended to complete that plan. He saw the agent at the door. He saw Tate with the laptop. And then his eyes found Maya standing between him and the room, at the end of the corridor. He stopped. For a moment, nobody said anything. The corridor hummed with the low frequency of a hospital, at night ventilation, distant monitors, the settling sounds of a large building. "Dr. Marsh," Maya said. His expression reorganized itself into something that wanted to be authoritative. "I'm here to check on a patient. You don't have patients on this floor." "I was asked to consult by whom?" She kept her voice completely even. "Because the attending for this floor is Dr. Osi, and she didn't request a cardiology consult. And you resigned from Hartwell 8 months ago, which means any consult request would need to go through credentialing, which takes at minimum 72 hours. She tilted her head slightly. "So let's try again." Something moved through his face, not the collapse of a guilty man who'd been caught, but the colder recalculation of a man who was deciding whether a situation was still recoverable. His eyes went to the agent at the door to Tate, back to Maya. She watched him count his options the same way she had watched Fitch count his in the ICU 2 nights ago, and she saw him arrive at the same basic conclusion, Yprit. There were fewer options than he had entered the building believing. "I want a lawyer," Marsh said. "That's a reasonable thing to want," Maya said. "You should probably also want to sit down." "Come, Carl." He sat down not because she told him to, but because Pharaoh came through the fire door with 2 agents 30 seconds later, and the geometry of the corridor left him very little choice about where to be. The agents flanked him with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times. And Pharaoh walked past him without a word and stopped in front of Maya and looked at the corridor and the closed door and the agent at his post and the warm ice pack on the floor. She looked at Maya's left cheekbone, which by now had developed the kind of color that made people wince. "Vallus?" she said. "Elbow," Maya said. "You need to get that looked at. I need to know what Marsh has on his person first." Pharaoh turned to the agents with Marsh. The search was quick and professional. A hospital badge, old, inactive, the kind that should have been surrendered at resignation. A personal phone. A second phone, prepaid, the same model as the one Harker had used. And in the inner pocket of the dark jacket, a folded piece of paper that one of the agents unfolded carefully lay and held up to Pharaoh. It was a floor plan. 4th floor, Hartwell Regional Medical Center. Garrett Weston's room was circled in pen. Someone had printed it within the last several hours, because the room number reflected the transfer. The transfer that had been visible only through the respiratory therapy scheduling system, and that had been passed to Marsh through the communication chain that Tate had just spent the last half-hour tracing. Marsh had been the third contact all along. Not an operative inside the hospital, a former insider who had maintained NSACSET through an NSAC through an administrative failure and had been running logistics from outside while Harker and Vallis worked from within. He had recruited them both. The FBI would establish that over the following days, but Maya understood the basic shape of it standing in the corridor at 1220A. M, looking at a circled room number on a printed floor plan. He had come to finish it himself. When Fitch was taken, when Harker was taken, when Vallis was taken, he had decided that the only way to close the window before Friday was to walk in personally. You had 8 months of planning, Maya said, not to Farrow, not to the agents, to Marsh directly. Because she wanted to understand, in the same clinical way she wanted to understand an unfamiliar medication or an unexpected lab result. 3 operatives inside this building. 2 attempts, both failed. And you came in yourself. Marsh looked at her. His lawyer request composure had settled into something that wasn't quite defeat and wasn't quite defiance, a kind of suspended state that she had seen before on the faces of people who were still processing the distance between where they had expected to be and where they actually were. "You're the nurse," he said. "Yes. You were supposed to be handled." "I keep hearing that," Maya said. He looked away. Whatever he had decided to say to a lawyer, he kept behind his teeth. Farrow had him in federal custody and out of the building by 1A. M. The rest of the night was the specific, grinding work of aftermath, the documentation, the chain of custody procedures for the second syringe, the badge access audit that Tate ran to establish the full timeline of Marsh's movements through Hartwell's system over the previous 8 months. Maya sat in on parts of it because Farrow kept asking her questions and she kept having answers, and she drank 3 cups of the bad 4th floor coffee and at some point accepted that she was not going to sleep again before morning. At 3 a.m., Garrett Weston's blood pressure dropped. It was not dramatic, not the crashing, alarm-saturated collapse of a medical crisis in a film, but the quiet, incremental thing that Maya had been trained to catch before it became dramatic. A systolic that had been running at 108 moved to 101, then to 97, over the span of 40 minutes. His heart rate compensated upward. His urine output, which she checked hourly, dropped by 30%. She was in the room before the monitor's threshold alert triggered. The drop had a cause, not the assassination attempts, not the stress of being moved. His IV fluids had been running at a maintenance rate appropriate for his morning weight, but the transfer and the evening's events had produced an insensible loss that nobody had accounted for, because the evening's events had not been the kind of evening where anyone's attention was on fluid balance. It was a straightforward volume deficit, the kind that was easy to miss and easy to fix if you caught it. She called the on-call hospitalist, a third-year resident named Dr. Paul Nuise, who arrived looking rumpled and slightly defensive in the specific way of residents who suspected they'd missed something. His weight this morning was 84 kilos, Maya said, handing him the fluid chart before he could look at the monitor and try to interpret it without context. He's been running at 80 mils per hour maintenance. Given the transfer, the evening activity, and the ambient temperature differential between the 6th floor and this room, I'm estimating a deficit of roughly 400 mils. I'd recommend a 250 mil bolus over 30 minutes and reassessment. Nuise looked at the chart, looked at the monitor, looked at Maya. "How did you—" "I've been his nurse for 9 days," she said. "I know what his numbers look like when they're right." He ordered the bolus. By 4 a.m., Weston's pressure was back to 108 and trending stable. Nuise documented the intervention with Maya's name in the assessment note, not because she asked Tim to, but because he was one of those residents who understood that documentation was about accuracy rather than credit, which made him better than average. She sat in the chair outside Garrett Weston's room and felt the specific exhaustion that came not from lack of sleep, but from sustained hypervigilance finally stepping back. Her cheekbone had moved through the swelling phase and into the bruising phase, which was duller and more persistent. She would need to have it assessed. She would do that in the morning. Farrow found her there at 5 a.m. Treasury finished the account trace. Farrow said sitting in the chair Tate had occupied earlier. 6 shells in 4 jurisdictions. The originating account is registered to a holding company in Delaware. The holding company has 1 listed director. She looked at her notes, but Maya had the sense she had the name memorized and was consulting the notes as a professional habit. His name is Aldous Crane. He chairs the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Special Operations Oversight, the Senate. Maya held that for a moment. She had known the shape of it, had understood since Tate said Oversight Committee that whatever this was, it reached into institutional structures that didn't bend easily. But knowing the shape and hearing the specific name were different experiences. He has access to Weston's classified operational files, she said. Full access. As subcommittee chair, he oversees the budget and operational review for the unit Weston served with. He would have known what Weston's mission produced. He would have known what Weston was scheduled to debrief about. Farrow paused. And he would have known that if Weston made it to that debrief, certain information would become part of the official intelligence record in ways that couldn't be quietly managed afterward. What did Weston find out there? Maya said. We don't know yet. The operational files are still classified at a level above my clearance. But given that a sitting U.S. senator has apparently spent 8 months and significant money trying to prevent a Navy SEAL from regaining consciousness and talking to anyone, I think we can assume it's significant. Significant. Maya looked at the door of Garrett Weston's room. Behind it, a man was breathing steadily through a ventilator, his blood pressure back to normal, his brain healing on a timeline that nobody could fully predict. He didn't know what the last 48 hours had looked like on his behalf. He didn't know about Fitch or Vallis or Harker or Marsh. He didn't know about the nurse who had been in the building for 30 hours straight, documenting everything, watching his numbers, standing between him and everything that was trying to reach him. Crane, she said. The DOJ is being briefed now. A federal grand jury will likely be convened within the week. Given the evidence chain Marsh's communications, Harker's testimony, the financial trace, the physical evidence from both attempts, the case is strong. Unusually strong, actually. Farrow looked at her. In no small part because a certain nurse documented everything in real time and preserved every piece of evidence with the kind of procedural precision that makes prosecutors very happy. That's my job, Maya said. It's more than that, Farrow said. And I think you know it. Maya didn't argue with her. She was too tired to argue with things that were true. The formal federal notification of Aldous Crane's investigation was delivered to his Washington office at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, and the controlled detonation it produced in the political and intelligence landscape was something Maya learned about secondhand from news alerts on her phone. From the fragments of conversation that moved through the hospital like current through a wire. She was in the on-call room when the story broke publicly, and she watched the news cycle begin its predictable acceleration with the removed attention of someone who had been inside the thing before it became a story. Crane denied everything, which was expected. His office released a statement describing the allegations as politically motivated, which was also expected. The statements mentioned concerns about the credibility of federal investigations built partly on the testimony of contracted operatives, which was where the statement stopped being effective because Roland Fitch's communication records, Dennis Harker's formal cooperation agreement, and the financial trace from the Luxembourg account to Crane's Delaware holding company were already in the hands of 3 different federal prosecutors and none of that evidence had any patience for statements. By Thursday afternoon, 2 of Crane's senior staffers had hired separate legal counsel. By Thursday evening, a third had filed a cooperation agreement with the DOJ. Maya slept through most of Thursday afternoon in the on-call room. She woke at 5 p.m., checked her phone, read the news for approximately 4 minutes, and then set her phone face down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the night this had started the badge access log entry at 2:48 the man with the wrong movements and the unlabeled syringe, the specific moment she had stepped between him and the IV line. She thought about how close the margin had been. 4 minutes between Fitch entering the ICU and Maya noticing the log entry. 40 seconds between her reaching Weston's room and Fitch reaching the IV port. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of manual ventilation before Fitch blew the door. 17 seconds between the moment she took Vallis's wrist and the moment the agents arrived. She thought about all the versions of that night in which the margins had been slightly different, in which she hadn't been the kind of nurse who checked the badge log, in which she had decided the ventilator technician at 1A. M was none of her business, in which she had left at 7:30 like she was supposed to. She got up, dressed, and went to check on her patients. The 6th floor was its usual nighttime self. The hum of equipment, the low lights, the particular quality of quiet that was not peace, but was the closest thing to it that a critical care unit could produce. The stroke patient had finally stopped reaching for her NG tube. The sepsis patient's creatinine had improved enough that the cautiously optimistic. The cardiac patients were both stable. The 2 post-surgical cases were progressing on schedule. Bed 7 was still empty, its ventilator running quiet settings for a patient who wasn't there. Maya stood outside the glass and looked at it for a moment. Then she went to the nursing station and documented her evening assessments with the same precision she brought to every shift, every night, regardless of what else was happening around her. Dr. Osi found her there at 8 p.m. "He's waking up," Osi said. Maya looked up from the chart. "Weston. The sedation wean we started this afternoon. He's showing purposeful movement, following commands. The neuro team was just there." Osi's expression was the careful neutrality of a physician who had learned not to make promises about TBI recovery, but who was clearly holding something she was trying not to show. "They think he might be extubatable by Friday morning." Friday morning, the transfer date, the debrief. "Is he going to make it?" Maya said. She meant to Virginia. She meant to the room where someone would sit across from him and take down everything he'd brought back. "His trajectory is good," Osi said. "His pressure is stable, his ICP is down, his liver function is improving. If he continues trending overnight," she stopped, recalibrated. "Yes, I think he's going to make it." Maya nodded. She turned back to the chart. "You should go home," Osi said. "You've been here for... I know how long I've been here." Osi was quiet for a moment. "Your cheekbone needs imaging. I can have the ED fit you in right now, after my shift." "Maya, after my shift," she said again, and the firmness of it was not rudeness. It was the particular quality of a decision that had already been made and did not require renegotiation. Osi looked at her for a moment, the assessing look of one medical professional measuring another profession, and then she nodded and went back to her work. Maya documented. She ran her assessments. She monitored her patients with the same systematic attention she brought to every night, moving bed to bed with the flashlight in her pocket and the flow sheets in her hand, doing the work that kept people alive in the hours when the building was dark and quiet, and the only person paying full attention was the one in blue scrubs, who everyone else had already decided didn't need to be noticed. At 11 p.m., Farrow appeared on the floor. She stood at the nursing station for a moment before she said anything. Maya kept documenting and let her stand there, because Farrow was not a woman who needed prompting. "Crane's attorneys reached out to the DOJ tonight," Farrow said. "Proffer agreement. He wants to discuss terms. He's going to cooperate. He's going to try to manage the damage, which is different from cooperating, but the outcome for the investigation is similar. She paused. He's not the only one. We pulled the financial records on 2 of the shell companies in the chain and identified a secondary beneficiary, someone else, who was receiving payments from the same account structure that funded the Weston operation. A retired defense contractor who served on the same subcommittee oversight board 12 years ago. She paused. The scope of what Weston apparently discovered is larger than we initially assessed. Maya set down her pen. How large? Large enough that the DOJ is coordinating with 3 other federal agencies and at least 1 allied intelligence service. Farrow looked at the nursing station, at the quiet monitors, at the dark room of beds 7 at the end of the unit. Large enough that when Weston makes it that to debrief and his physicians tell it, the information he provides is going to move through systems at a level that neither of us is cleared to see. But it'll move, Maya said. Yes, Farrow said. It'll move. They were quiet for a moment in the way of 2 people who had been through something together and had arrived at a place that was not the end, but was the first point where stopping and breathing felt possible. One more thing, Farrow said. She produced an evidence envelope from inside her jacket, standard FBI issue, sealed, with a case number on the label. The second syringe, the one Vallis brought. She set it on the counter. The lab completed analysis. Same compound as the first. Identical concentration, identical formulation. She looked at Maya. Custom synthesis. Not available through any commercial pharmaceutical channel. Requires specialized equipment and someone with a very specific graduate-level chemistry background. She tapped the envelope. We found the lab, 40 miles outside Pittsburgh, in a leased industrial space registered to another of Crane's shell companies. The chemist who produced both syringes was arrested there this afternoon. How many doses did they produce? Maya said. Farrow's expression answered the question before her words did. 7. Maya absorbed that. They had 5 more. The lab has been secured and all materials seized. But yes, when they planned this operation, they planned for the possibility of multiple failed attempts. Farrow looked at her directly, which means someone looked at the probability of success for each attempt and concluded that 5 backup doses was an appropriate contingency. They expected interference, Maya said. They expected some interference. I don't think they expected. Farrow paused, and in the pause there was something that might, from a federal agent with 20 years of experience and a face trained to professional neutrality, have been the closest available approximation of appreciation. I don't think they modeled for you specifically. The evidence envelope sat on the nursing station counter. Maya looked at it for a moment, the clean, bureaucratic container for something that had been designed to stop a man's heart without leaving a trace. 7 doses, she said. 7, Farrow confirmed. Maya picked up her pen and went back to her documentation. She was still writing when her phone buzzed at 11:47 p. A text from an unknown number, no name, just 10 digits, and a message that had come in through her personal line, which meant whoever had sent it had access to her personal contact information. The message read, "You should have walked away when you had the chance. This isn't finished." She looked at the message for 3 seconds. Then she forwarded it to Farrow's number and set the phone down and kept writing. Farrow was through the nursing station door in under a minute. She read the forwarded message on her own phone, and her expression, for the first time in the 40-something hours Maya had known her, showed something that was not controlled. Your phone don't delete anything. Don't respond. I need our tech team on this right now. She was already on her radio. When did it come in? 11:47. Crane's attorney called the DOJ at 11:31, Farrow said. 16 minutes before this message. She looked at Maya with eyes that had gone very sharp. The proffer agreement, Crane reaching out to cooperate. He's not trying to manage damage. He's stalling. He's buying time for whoever sent this to Minitz. She stopped. The elevator at the end of the corridor hummed to life. The elevator hummed. Neither Maya nor Pharaoh moved for exactly 1 second, the specific second it took, to process that the fourth floor had been the location of the last attempt, that Garrett Weston was no longer on the fourth floor, and that whoever had sent that message 16 minutes after Crane called the DOJ knew enough about the hospital's layout to know which elevator to take. "Where is Weston right now?" Maya said. Pharaoh was already on her radio. "Weston's current location confirmed for me right now." The response came back in 4 seconds. "Fourth floor, room 412, 2 agents on the door." "Move him," Pharaoh said. "Right now. Off the 4th floor, different wing. Do not use the elevator. Stairwell only. I want him moved in the next 3 minutes." She looked at Maya. "The message to your personal phone. They have your number." They're watching this building in real time. Someone outside is feeding instructions to someone inside. "Not Harker," Maya said. "Not Vallis? Not Marsh?" "No," Pharaoh's jaw was tight. "Someone we haven't identified. Someone who was careful enough to stay dark through everything we've pulled so far." She pointed at Maya. "You do not go near that elevator. Stay at the nursing station." Pharaoh moved toward the fire door to the stairwell. Maya stayed at the nursing station for approximately 8 seconds, which was how long it took her to pull up the floor access log on the terminal and check the most recent badge entry on the 6th floor. The entry read, "Dr. Raymond Alderman, CMO 11:44 p.m., 3 minutes before the text message, 2 minutes before the elevator activated." She called Pharaoh's earpiece. Alderman badged into the 6th floor at 11:44. A beat of silence. Then Alderman. "His credentials are still active. He's the CMO. Nobody questioned his access." Maya was already looking down the 6th floor corridor in both directions. "He came in the front. He's on this floor right now." "Where?" She scanned the unit. The stroke patient's room light off. Patient stable. The cardiac patient's both rooms dim. Monitors cycling. The sepsis room, she could see movement through the glass, but it was the patient shifting position, not an intruder. The supply corridor at the far end of the unit, which ran behind the nursing station and connected to the medication room and the equipment storage bay, was dark. The equipment storage bay had a secondary exit to the main corridor. The main corridor connected to the elevator bank and to the stairwell that accessed the 4th floor. "Supply corridor," Maya said. She moved. Not running, moving with the quick, deliberate stride that didn't trigger alarm bells in patients who might be partially awake, that didn't create the specific sounds of urgency that carried through quiet hospital corridors at midnight. She went through the door at the back of the nursing station and into the supply corridor, and the darkness there was complete until her flashlight came on. The corridor was empty. She swept the beam left toward the medication room. Right, toward the equipment bay. Both doors were closed. She tried the equipment bay door. It opened. Inside, the familiar smell of plastic packaging and equipment lubricant, shelves of supplies running floor to ceiling. Someone had moved something. She could tell, because she knew where things belonged in this room. 4 years of reaching for the same equipment in the same places built a spatial memory that didn't require conscious effort. A box of IV extension sets that normally lived on the 3rd shelf was on the 2nd shelf. The path between the shelving units that led to the secondary exit door was clear in a way it usually wasn't. The portable scale that normally sat in that pathway was pushed aside. The secondary exit door was not fully closed. A 2-centimeter gap showed the edge of the corridor on the other side. Maya looked at the gap, looked at the pushed-aside scale, looked at the repositioned IV box. She backed out of the equipment bay and went back to the nursing station and called Pharaoh. He went through the equipment bay to the main corridor. He's heading for the stairwell. "I have agents on the 4th floor stairwell." "Not the 4th floor stairwell," Maya said. "The 3rd floor. The on-call rooms are on the 3rd floor." If someone told him I was staying in an on-call room. Pharaoh was already moving. Maya could hear it. Get to the nursing station and stay there, Farrow said. I mean it this time. The on-call room I was using is 3C. It's in the East Wing. I heard you. Stay where you are. Maya stayed at the nursing station. She watched her monitors. She documented the 11:52 vital signs for the sepsis patient, because the sepsis patient's vital signs needed documenting regardless of what was happening in the stairwell, and she had learned in places considerably more chaotic than this that the work didn't stop when things were frightening. The work was exactly what you did when things were frightening, because it was the only part of the situation you could fully control. She heard the arrest over her earpiece at 12 a.m. Farrow's voice, clipped and clear. Alderman in custody, 3rd floor east stairwell. He had a phone and a key card that doesn't correspond to any Hartwell-issued credential. We're running it now. Raymond Alderman, the chief medical officer who had arrived in his coat over his pajamas the morning after the first attempt and stood in the ICU corridor and said you to Maya like her name was an accusation. Who had told the security team the DOD credentials were verified through standard channels. Who had been in the building, paged, present, theoretically managing the crisis, while every piece of the operation played out around him. He hadn't been managing the crisis. He had been watching it, feeding information out when it mattered. And when everything else collapsed, when Crane's attorney call bought a window of 16 minutes, he had come in person to close the one loose end that was still standing in blue scrubs at a nursing station on the 6th floor. The key card he carried opened on-call room 3C. Maya found that out at 12:30 a.m. when Farrow came back to the 6th floor and told her. She heard it and did not say anything for a moment. He had a card made for your room, she said finally. Yes. When? Tate is pulling the physical access records. Best estimate is sometime in the last 18 hours, after your room assignment was logged in the administrative system. Farrow sat down in the chair across from the nursing station. She looked tired, genuinely tired, the kind that went past the professional surface. He's been inside this operation longer than Marsh. Marsh recruited Harker and Vallis and ran the logistics, but Alderman was the institutional anchor. He's the reason Fitch's credentials passed the hospital's verification system. He's the reason the DoD protective detail was positioned in a way that left Weston accessible. He approved the maintenance schedules, the biomedical engineering access windows, every internal system that Fitch and the others used to build their plan. He was here the whole time, Maya said, from day one. When Weston was transferred to Hartwell, Alderman was contacted within 24 hours. The transfer routing had been arranged to put Weston at the specific facility because of Alderman's connection to Crane's network. Farrow looked at her directly. He knew your work history, your service record. He knew what you were capable of before Fitch ever walked into that ICU. He's the one who responded to Fitch's 3-9 message. Maya was quiet. Already handled, she said. Yes. He was going to handle me before the first attempt was even complete. He had a plan for me from the beginning. He underestimated you, Farrow said. The same way everyone else did. That sentence sat in the room between them. Maya let it sit. She didn't feel the satisfaction that the sentence seemed to expect. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. What she felt was the specific, stripped-back clarity of someone who has been running on adrenaline and purpose for 50-some hours and has just watched the last piece of the thing she was running against finally come off the board. She was also very hungry, and her cheekbone hurt considerably. I need to get that imaging done, she said. Yes, Farrow said. You do. The ED at 1 a.m. was its own particular world, different from the ICU, different from the quiet of overnight nursing floors, loud with the specific randomness of emergency medicine. The attending who assessed Maya's cheekbone was a young woman named Dr. Sylvie Tran, who had the no-nonsense efficiency of emergency physicians everywhere, and who looked at the bruise and said, "That's a good one," with the clinical appreciation of someone who had seen considerably. worse, and was being honest about the relative scale. The imaging showed no fracture. Soft tissue contusion, significant but uncomplicated. Ice ibuprofen. And sleep, Tran said. In that order, Maya said. Is there a reason you've been awake for? Tran looked at the chart. I'm estimating over 50 hours. Several, Maya said. Tran looked at her face for a moment. You're the one, she said. From the ICU. The whole building knows. I was doing my job, Maya said. Yeah, Tran said. And her voice had a quality that was not quite reverence, but was the thing adjacent to it that existed between people who understood what the work actually was. That's what they keep saying. Maya went back to the on-call room, a different one, 2 floors from the original, with an agent outside the door who was awake and alert and had the specific posture of someone who had been briefed thoroughly. She lay down on the narrow bed in her scrubs and closed her eyes and was asleep in under 4 minutes. She slept for 9 hours. She woke at 11 a.m., on Friday to 3 missed calls from Farrow and a text from Tate that said, Weston is being extubated. Thought you'd want to know. She was dressed and out of the room in 6 minutes. The 4th floor room where Garrett Weston had spent his second night was bright with morning light when Maya arrived, which was a different kind of room than she had been keeping watch over, warm and ordinary and full of those of a man who was breathing on his own for the first time in 12 days. The ventilator had been pushed to the side. The respiratory therapist, not Vallis, a different one, someone with no history in federal databases, was completing the post-extubation assessment. Dr. Ossie was reviewing the numbers. Garrett Weston was awake. He was not fully awake, not the alert, conversational consciousness of a healthy man, but the partial, effortful awareness of someone whose brain had been through significant trauma and was finding its way back in stages. His eyes were open and tracking. He could follow a finger. He had squeezed Ossie's hand on command. He had tried to speak and produced a sound that was not yet a word, but was clearly intended as one which the speech pathology team, when they arrived, would assess and map for recovery planning. Maya stood at the door. She wasn't his nurse anymore. Technically, he was on the 4th floor, which was a different unit, and her assignment was the 6th floor ICU. She had no clinical reason to be standing at his door. She had every reason she needed. He turned his head. Slowly, with the deliberate effort of someone recalibrating the relationship between intention and movement. His eyes found the doorway and found her, and she didn't know what he could see or process clearly at this stage of recovery. She didn't know if he could understand faces or make sense of a stranger standing at his door in blue scrubs. But he looked at her, held it for a moment, and something in his expression, not a smile, too effortful for that, too early for that, shifted into a quality that she recognized across the distance of the doorway. It was the look of a soldier who had made it back. She held it for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way you nodded at someone when words were insufficient and unnecessary in equal measure, and she turned and walked back to the elevator. The transfer team from the Virginia Military Medical Facility arrived at 2 p.m. 2 uniformed Army medical officers and a civilian physician who introduced herself as the lead attending for Weston's continued care. They were professional and thorough, and they spent 45 minutes reviewing every piece of documentation Maya had generated over 9 nights before the civilian physician looked up from the chart and said, "This is exceptional documentation." "It's standard documentation," Maya said. "It's not," the physician said simply. She wasn't being flattering. She was making a clinical observation. Most overnight nurses don't catch fluid drift on a TBI patient in the context of a federal security operation happening simultaneously. Most overnight nurses weren't tracking his baselines for 9 days. No, the physician said. They weren't. She closed the chart and looked at Maya directly. When he's stable enough to ask questions, and that will take weeks, maybe longer, he's going to ask about what happened here. About who kept him alive. She paused. What should I tell him? Maya thought about that. Tell him a nurse did her job, she said. Garrett Weston was transferred at 4 p.m. The transport was secure and swift, the kind of movement that happened when the right people had been notified and the right resources had been arranged, clean and efficient, in a way that the original security arrangement at Hartwell had conspicuously failed to be. Maya watched the transport from the window of the sixth-floor ICU, which had sight to the building's side entrance. She watched the gurney move, watched the doors close, watched the vehicle pull out. She went back to her patients. The formal administrative review began the following Monday. It was conducted by Hartwell's board of directors, with 2 federal observers and a legal team that had been hired over the weekend to manage the institution's exposure in the aftermath of an assassination attempt, a hospital cyber attack, 2 federal arrests on hospital grounds, and the revelation that the chief medical officer had been an active participant in a criminal conspiracy targeting a federal protected patient. Maya was asked to appear on Tuesday morning. She wore the same clothes she wore to the hospital, everyday clean scrubs, her harassment-out shoes, her badge on its lanyard. She sat across from 7 board members in the hospital's main conference room, which had a long mahogany table and the specific airless quality of rooms where important people sat and discussed things without ever having to experience the consequences of those discussions firsthand. The board chair was a woman named Constance Webb, who had the kind of silver-haired authority that came from decades of institutional leadership and who looked at Maya the way people looked at situations they had not anticipated and were still calibrating. Nurse Bennett, Webb said, "We've reviewed the federal incident reports, the security camera footage, your shift documentation, and the statements of Agents Farrow and Tate. We've also reviewed the employment records and the circumstances surrounding Dr. Alderman's tenure." She folded her hands on the table. "I want to ask you directly, in the 9 days preceding the first incident, did you report any concerns to hospital administration about the security arrangement for patient Weston?" "I reported the unusual ventilator calibration visit to the overnight supervisor," Maya said. "I was told it was scheduled and not to be concerned." "Who was the overnight supervisor that evening?" "Charge nurse Donna Farrell." Webb wrote something down. "And prior to that, I flagged the DoD protective detail's inconsistent positioning twice in my shift notes. The notes are in the system and were available to any supervising physician." "Were they reviewed?" "I don't know what Dr. Alderman reviewed," Maya said. "I know what I documented." The room was quiet for a moment. "I want to be direct with you," Webb said, and her voice shifted into something that had less of the boardroom in it. "The hospital's position, and I want to be clear, this reflects the full board's consensus, is that your actions throughout this incident were not only appropriate, but likely prevented multiple patient deaths, including the death of a federal witness. The interference you were accused of by Dr. Alderman in the immediate aftermath of the first incident was unfounded. Your documentation has been reviewed by 3 independent clinical consultants and described as exemplary." She paused. "We owe you an apology." Maya looked at her. "We owe you an apology," Webb said again, "for the culture at this institution that made it possible for your concerns to be dismissed, for the supervisory structure that allowed Dr. Alderman's conduct to go undetected, and for the specific way you were spoken to in this building by people who held authority over you and used that authority to tell you that your judgment didn't matter." She was not reading from notes. She had these words ready because she had decided she was going to say them. Your judgment mattered. It mattered more than I think any of us are fully equipped to measure right now. Maya was quiet for a moment. She had not expected an apology. She had expected the administrative version of what she always got acknowledgement, wrapped in institutional language that simultaneously admitted nothing and protected everything. The apology was not that. It was a real one, imperfect, probably incomplete, offered by a woman who understood that an apology was the minimum and not the resolution, but who was offering it directly and without hedging. "Thank you," Maya said. The board has voted to offer you the charge nurse position on the ICU night shift, effective immediately upon your acceptance. There is also a formal commendation being submitted to the Pennsylvania State Board of Nursing for inclusion in your professional record. Webb paused. We'd also like to offer a full review of the nursing staff compensation structure, which our own assessment has determined has not reflected the actual scope of responsibilities carried by this unit's overnight team. It wasn't everything. It wasn't everything. It wasn't close to everything, because everything would have meant years of being overlooked and managed and talked past had never happened, and nothing that happened in a mahogany table conference room could reverse the years. But it was something real and documented and public, which was the only form of recognition that meant anything in an institution. I'll accept the charge nurse position, Maya said, and I'd like to be part of the compensation review. Done, Webb said. Farrow called that afternoon. Grand jury convened this morning, she said. Crane's cooperation agreement fell apart when his two former staffers submitted independent testimony that contradicted his account on 3 material points. His attorney is now negotiating from a significantly weaker position. She sounded like someone delivering information she had been waiting to deliver. Alderman waived arraignment and entered a not guilty plea, which his attorney will regret when they've seen the full evidence package. Marsh has cooperated and is working toward a reduced charge in exchange for full testimony. Harker has formally cooperated. Vallis is still not talking, but she doesn't need to be. The evidence against her is physical and documented. Fitch, Maya said, arraigned on federal charges, including attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, use of a biological weapon in commerce, cyber attack on a federal medical facility, and 3 counts of identity fraud. His attorney has been very quiet, which usually means they've looked at the evidence and understood that silence is the best available strategy. Farrow paused. He's going to spend a very long time in a federal facility. All of them are. Maya was sitting in the break room on the 6th floor. It was 3 p.m. And she had an hour before her shift started. And she was eating an actual meal for the first time in days, a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks away that she had walked to and back from in the cold air, which had felt like a significant luxury. The chemist, she said, the one who synthesized the compound. Cooperating fully, he designed 7 doses and will testify to the design specifications and the chain of custody from production to delivery. His testimony connects the physical compound to Crane's financial chain and from there to the entire operation. Farrow let that settle. It's a solid case, Maya. It's going to hold. She ate the rest of her sandwich. She thought about a man named Garrett Weston, somewhere in Virginia, breathing on his own. His brain slowly rebuilding the pathways that connected intention to action, carrying whatever he had brought back from wherever they had sent him and had tried so hard to prevent him from ever saying out loud, hey. She thought about what Webb had said in the conference room. Your judgment mattered. She had known that. She had known it the moment she looked at the badge log entry and picked up the phone and called the security desk. She had known it when she clamped the IV tubing and hit the emergency call button and held the ambu bag through a power failure and an explosion and a man with night vision goggles in the dark. She had not needed the board of directors to tell her that her judgment mattered. She had lived it in real time at 3 a.m. in a room where the difference between her acting and not acting was a man's life. But there was something about the institution saying it. Something about it being documented and public and real in the way that institutional language made things real, not because the institution's opinion of her was the measure of her worth, but because the people who worked around her, the nurses who came in every morning and went home every night doing work that nobody fully saw, needed to exist in a place where the institution understood that their judgment mattered too. That when a nurse said something was wrong, the appropriate response was not, don't worry about it. That the gap between what clinical staff observed and what administration chose to hear had consequences that played out in the most irreversible ways. She didn't think Hartwell would fully fix that gap. She was not optimistic enough to believe that one crisis and one board meeting and one commendation would dismantle something that had been built over decades. But she was going to be the charge nurse on the night shift, and she was going to be part of the compensation review, and she was going to be present in this building every night with the same clipboard and the same flashlight and the same refusal to be told that what she noticed didn't matter. That was not nothing. She finished her sandwich. She checked the time. She put on her badge and walked to the ICU. The 6th floor was exactly what it always was: monitors and ventilators, and the quiet persistence of people who were fighting in the particular way that unconscious, sedated, critically ill people fought, simply by continuing. The stroke patient had been downgraded from ICU care and was being transferred to a step-down unit tomorrow. The sepsis patient was eating Jell-O, which was a medical milestone that received approximately the celebration it deserved from Maya, which was a small smile and a note in the chart. The cardiac patients were both stable. 2 new admissions had come in during the day, shift a post-surgical case, and a respiratory failure patient who was vented and sedated and whose baseline Maya was already memorizing. Brenda Hollis was at the nursing station at the end of the day shift, waiting to give handoff. She looked at Maya when she came in, and her expression did not have the old quality in it, the one that communicated dismissal without ever articulating it directly. What it had instead was something more honest and considerably less comfortable, which was the look of a person who had reassessed a prior judgment and found the prior judgment significantly lacking. "The new admits are in the system," Brenda said. "The respiratory failure patient came in through the ED at noon. She's been stable since intubation, but the day team flagged her peak pressures as higher than expect for her underlying diagnosis." "I'll look at the waveform," Maya said. "I already looked." "I think—" Brenda stopped. "I'd like to hear your take." Maya looked at her for a moment. 4 years of shifts passing each other in a hallway. 4 years of handoffs conducted with the minimum required words. 4 years of Brenda's expression communicating that the night team was something to be managed rather than consulted. "Show me," Maya said. They stood at the monitoring screen together and looked at the ventilator waveform for the respiratory failure patient, and Maya traced the pressure curve with one finger and saw if what she thought she saw, and Brenda confirmed she'd seen the same thing. And they had a conversation about it, a real one. Clinical and specific. 2 nurses with different experience sets, looking at the same data and arriving at the same concern and documenting it so the overnight attending would have context when they accessed the patient in 2 hours. It was not a dramatic thing. It was the baseline of what the work was supposed to be. But it had not been what the work was for 4 years between them. And both of them knew it, and neither of them said it directly, because saying it directly would have required the conversation to be about the past, and the patient's ventilator waveform was about right now, and right now was where the work lived. Brenda left at 7:30. Maya started her rounds. She went bed by bed the way she always did, with her flashlight and her clipboard, and the specific attention that the night shift required the hours when the building was quiet, and the families had gone home, and the day team had handed off, and the patients were left with the monitors, and the medication pumps, and the nurses who moved through the dark, taking careful note of everything. She checked her new admissions and updated her assessments. She caught the peak pressure issue on the respiratory patient early enough to notify the attending before it became a crisis, which was the whole point of catching things early. She was at the nursing station at 10 p.m. when her phone showed a text from an unknown number. Her hand stopped. Then she looked at it and saw that it was not a threat. It was not Alderman or Crane or anyone connected to the operation that had spent 3 days trying to kill her patient and had spent those same 3 days failing. The text said, "This is Garrett Weston. They told me your name. I understand I owe you more than I know how to say. GW." She read it twice. She sat with it for a moment, the strange, quiet weight of a sentence from a man she had kept alive across 9 nights without ever hearing his voice, a man who had been somewhere overseas, carrying something important enough that powerful people had decided he needed to die before he could say it, a man whose chest she had watched rise and fall in the dark, and whose numbers she had memorized and whose numbers she had memorized, and whose fluid balance she had calculated while explosions went off in the corridor outside his room. She typed back, "Get better. That's all you owe me." She set the phone down and went back to her documentation. At midnight, she walked to bed 7 and stood outside the empty room for a moment. The ventilator was gone, now returned to the equipment pool, cleaned and cleared for the next patient who would need it. The monitoring cables were coiled neatly on the bedside table. The room had the particular emptiness of a space that had been cleaned and prepared and was waiting for whoever came next. She thought about what it meant to do this work. Not the dramatic version, not night. The lights went out, and the syringe skidded across the bed rail and the defibrillator screen blazed in the dark. The ordinary version. The version that was every other night, the 900 nights before this one. And however many came after, the clipboard and the flow sheet and the medication reconciliation and the careful memorization of baselines and the willingness to pick up the phone and ask an uncomfortable question and stand in front of something that was wrong and say, no. People were alive because of that work. Not because of the dramatic moments, though those mattered. Because of the accumulated weight of every small, careful thing done correctly by someone who had decided that correctly was the only way she knew how to do anything. Nobody saw most of it. Nobody was supposed to. The work didn't require witnesses to be real. But she thought about every nurse on every overnight shift in every hospital, in every city, moving through dark corridors with flashlights in their pockets, catching the thing the day team missed, holding the thing that was slipping, making the calculation at 3A. Mem that nobody else was awake to make. She thought about the ones who raised the concern and got told not to worry about it. The ones who saw something wrong and were managed into silence. The ones who had the training and the instinct and the experience and spent years being treated like the least significant person in the room. She thought about what it cost to keep showing up anyway. She thought about the specific kind of strength that looked like nothing from the outside, that wore blue scrub, and carried a clipboard and didn't raise its voice and didn't ask for credit and kept coming back, shift after shift, night after night, to a building that didn't fully understand what it had. That strength had a name, and the name was not heroism, because heroism implied exception, and this was not exceptional. It was consistent. It was deliberate. It was chosen every single shift by people who understood that the choice mattered even when nobody was watching. Especially when nobody was watching. Maya turned away from the empty room and walked back to the nursing station. She had 4 patients whose baselines needed checking and a respiratory waveform that she wanted to reassess in the next hour, and a shift that had 6 hours left in it and work to do. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. She picked up her clipboard. She went back to her rounds. The hospital breathed around her, the hum of equipment, the soft cycling of ventilators, the distant sound of the elevator, the building alive, in the particular way of places where the work of keeping people alive never stopped. Not because the night was dramatic, not because anyone was watching, but because the next patient needed her attention, and the one after that, and the one after that, and this was the thing she had come back to do not in spite of everything that had happened this week, but as a continuation of it. The same choice extended forward into every shift that followed. Outside, Pittsburgh was cold and dark and ordinary. Inside, the night shift nurse made her rounds, and the hospital, for the first time in a very long time, was in exactly the right hands.